How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. Shemar Stewart's father has spoken regarding Shemar's contract situation dispute with the Cincinnati Bengals. And before we even dive into how he feels about the situation, I think it's important to note that if somebody were to ask my father why ESPN has not signed me yet, he'd probably say, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Adam Schefter doesn't know the difference between a football and a box of cereal. In other words, your father's going to say what he's got to say to benefit his son. And I would imagine, it doesn't matter what comes out of Mo's mouth here, it's going to favor Shemar. It's not going to say anything that he's, not complying with. That being said, Mo has come out and said, hey, it's not about today's money. It's not about tomorrow's money. Kind of confusing in a regard here because it's not about today's money. It's not about tomorrow's money, which is obviously referring to the signing bonus early guarantees. But it's more about the contract verbiage. The verbiage where the Bengals did something different this year they have not done in the past. Again, I question this part just because how do we know this? If they didn't have the same exact agent, how do we know the verbiage has not changed or it has not been the same? Unless, he personally went up to day one and said, hey, Jamar, did you guys have, this in your contract? Did you talk to their agents? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know the full rules behind that one. I did question that. That was the one thing I did question of it all is like, how did you know the exact verbiage that's not typically released? But anyway, the verbiage being, and it does make, if this is the issue at the end of the day, why make it up? That's the thing. So it's like, you do have to kind of take that part of the word here and just believe what's being said. But the problem being is the Bengals added verbiage regarding a default that can remove guarantees. Default being anywhere from, hey, this guy's a morale problem. Hey, this guy failed a drug test. Hey, this guy got suspended. Now we can avoid future years' money and he doesn't have to be paid out. Right now, NFL contracts fully guaranteed covers salary cap reasons. Say the Bengals want to cut him in year 2, year 3 to save some salary cap. Your fully guaranteed money, you still get it. If he's injured, fully guaranteed, you still get it. Skill problem, fully guaranteed, you still get it. But if it's partially guaranteed, say, hey, maybe your partially guaranteed money, it doesn't guarantee the skill bonus. So if you get released because you're just not good at football anymore, you're not guaranteed that money. That's the difference in guaranteed and fully guaranteed. But default is a whole different verbiage being added to the contract. And of course, now you take a step back and say, well, what are the Bengals doing? No question about it. What are you trying to prove? If this is, let's take Shemar for their word here. What are you trying to prove by going on adding a new clause? A lot of people look at it, it's like, okay, now you're already starting to second guess your draft pick. Well, you wasn't starting, you was always second guessing it. The fact of the matter is, Shemar Stewart was a problem day one. There was teams during the draft trying to speak to him, trying to talk to him, trying to, work out with him, and there was difficulties. That's documented well. And that's why teams passed up on him. There was that issue, that concern. So the Bengals knew that going into it. So you can't say, okay, now we're gonna, we're gonna hedge our bet here because we're worried about this stuff. We're gonna add this little default clause. No, you can't play that game. You was responsible at the end of the day. The Bengals are responsible fully for what happens in the future with Shemar Stewart. You can't just add magic clauses because you feel like you made a mistake or you worry about his issues. No, that was your choice. You could have passed up on him if that was a problem. That's why the contracts are set up the way they are. The guarantees are set up the way they are. You should be drafting a player you are 100% confident in the first place. You shouldn't be adding things to a contract like this. Again, I can understand why they want to do it. If the guy's 30 and he's got, he's been busted for PEDs twice. He's got a DUI on the chart. Yeah, I get it. But you chose this guy in the draft. You could have drafted anybody. And you chose this guy. And now you have these concerns. You're trying to add this verbiage. Of course, I can understand why Shemar's holding out. I can understand why they haven't signed this contract. Makes perfect sense. And for that reason, the Bengals, if that, again, the thing I really hate about contract, when you hear these leaks and stuff about it, you always hear, the best from one side's always going to release their good. The other side's always going to release their good. They always leave out the other. That I always try to be very mindful of, not completely assuming this is what's happening. Could it be? Absolutely. And, just diagnosing things from that regard is, if you're the Bengals, you can't take that game if you're the Bengals. The Bengals in that situation, being hard-nosed, doing what they've historically done. And that's why it's easier to believe, because the Bengals have had so many contract disputes, so many contract issues in the past. It is easy to say, hey, that's probably what's happening. There is a problem on both sides, though. I think at the end of the day, Shemar Stewart should be playing. 0 questions asked. If you truly want to be great, if you truly want this franchise not to be like, oh, should we take out an insurance policy? You should be training every single day. You should be practicing with the team. You should be doing your absolute best. I get it. The team, you're not, the situation of the contract's not how you like it. At the end of the day, if you're for the team, you're practicing with the team. If you're for your future better self, you're practicing, because practicing is going to make you better. It's going to help with your team, your morale. It's getting rid of this distraction. So yeah, Shemar could be doing better. I think it's one of those things where you look at the situation and say, both sides kind of hard-headed. Like I said, the draft showed that with Shemar. The Bengals, every single contract dispute with a decent player shows their difficulty there. And I think both sides have to take a step back and realize, like, hey, we got to take some responsibilities here. We're both doing wrong. Shemar should be on the field. Bengals should be adding stuff to contract language. Just do what they did. Mary Smith's contract last season, for example, fully guaranteed. That's what Shemar and company are asking. Is like, we just want what Amarius got, was the fully guaranteed, which was an interesting one because they fully guaranteed contract to a guy that actually had injury history. So a lot of head scratching activity happening with this contract, because if there was a time to add a default thing or not guarantee money, you would have thought last year was the year. I don't know. I just think the further you get along with this stuff, the more you become a distraction. And as a Bengals fan, when you think about weeks 1 and weeks 2, you just want this stuff. You don't want it to feel like you're going into practice, your team's going into practice, you're wondering, well, what's the media going to go ask Trey today? What's the media going to go ask Shemar today? What kind of distractions should we worry about today? It's like, you want to get them as distractions off the field. Even Jamar Chase said, like, hey, I felt like I wasn't there in the right headspace week 1 last season. Was I worried about the contract a little bit? Sure. Stuff like that does linger. Sometimes it can be hard to put that aside, and sometimes it can be a distraction. And just for the betterment of your team, the same can be said about the Bengals. Just you're not worried about that much money at the end of the day. It's a rookie contract. It's common practice every single year. Just follow the standard. Just follow the standard. We don't need to nickel and dime. We don't need to do this. You just gave again Amarius the money last year. Just make it easy on the team. We don't need to set this precedent every year. And again, I just don't understand why that might confuse me the most. Why are you trying to set this precedent with a first round pick? You have a second, a third, a fourth. You'd think if you was going to try to set this little clause in there, you'd be like, I'm going to throw it on a bunch of fourths, a bunch of thirds, we'll trickle up to the seconds. And eventually we'll say, hey, look, everybody else is signing it. But to set the precedent with what you hope is your future star on the defensive line doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, all I can hope is these two sides quickly try to collect a little bit here, cooler heads prevail, situation gets figured out. We'll see. Nonetheless, love y'all's thoughts. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.